8,499 receiving yards, a Super Bowl ring. The last snap came not because of a hit or trade, but a nightclub, a waistband, and a gun that went off. Plaxico Burress didn't get cut. He didn't retire. He went to prison. This isn't just a story about a dumb decision. It's the story of a player at his peak.
Did I do something that maybe some other people wouldn't do? Yeah. Did I make a mistake? Yeah. Did I pay the ultimate price for it? Of course.
To understand how far Plaxico Burress fell, you'd have to see how high he climbed. The Pittsburgh Steelers made him the 8th overall pick in the 2000 NFL Draft. And at 6'5", he was a wide receiver with a catch radius that made defensive backs recalculate before the snap. Now, Burress was never the most disciplined player in the building, but he was often the most dangerous. He spent 5 years in Pittsburgh, putting up over 4,000 yards and making plays when it mattered. But in 2005, everything changed. Burress signed with the New York Giants, and suddenly he found his footing. He became the downfield weapon Eli Manning needed. Not a stat sheet guy. Every week, a big moment guy. The kind of receiver you draw up plays for when the game is on the line. Now, by 2007, Burress was dealing with something most players would have sat out for. A chronic ankle injury was so severe that he couldn't practice. Every day, 3-hour treatment sessions, then acupuncture twice a week. But here's the thing. Every Sunday, he'd tape up and go to work anyway. And he finished the regular season with 70 catches, 1,025 yards, and a career-high 12 touchdowns without taking a single practice rep. Then, in January, at Lambeau Field for the NFC Championship game, and the conditions were severe. The temperature at kickoff was -1 degree Fahrenheit, and by the end of the game, -3. The wind chill hit -24 degrees. It was the second coldest game in Lambeau Field history, and players were cutting their warm-up short because standing still hurt too much. Burress caught 11 passes for 154 yards. The Giants won in overtime, and suddenly they were headed to face an 18-0 New England Patriots team that nobody believed they could beat. Fast forward to February 3rd, 2008, and the Patriots were undefeated. And with 35 seconds left, the Giants trailed 14-10. But they had just kept the drive alive with David Tyree's helmet catch, 32 yards on 3rd and 5 after Eli Manning scrambled out of pressure that should have ended everything. But here's what made it even more serious. The Patriots had the best defense in football, and Burress had been dealing with that ankle all season. The ball was on the 13-yard line, 35 seconds on the clock. Burress ran a fade route. He beat his man, and he hauled in the touchdown.
Burress is wide open. Touchdown Giants! 35 seconds to go, and the Giants regain the lead.
Giants 17, Patriots 14 in the greatest upset in Super Bowl history. Burress caught the winning pass. He had a newborn son at home. A new contract is coming. A city that loved him. This was supposed to be where Plaxico Burress became a legend. And he did become a legend, but not for anything that happened on a football field. The moment that defined Plaxico Burress came 11 months later in a Manhattan nightclub, and it had nothing to do with the game. Before we get to what happened that night, you need to understand the context. Because what Burress was carrying wasn't just paranoia. He was missing practices, then feuding with the coaching staff, and playing hurt. By multiple accounts, he was on edge. And here's the thing, he had reasons to be. Sean Taylor, a Washington Redskins safety, had been murdered in his own home during a break-in the year before. Taylor was shot in the leg and bled out. Then Darren Williams, a Denver Broncos cornerback, was killed, leaving a nightclub 2 years earlier in a drive-by shooting. Now, understand this. These weren't random players. These were NFL athletes in their mid-20s, killed in situations that felt too close to home. So, when Burress reportedly received threats, he started carrying a .40 caliber Glock semi-automatic pistol tucked in his waistband. He had no holster and no New York City firearms permit. His Florida concealed carry permit had expired 6 months earlier. And the Giants were 10-1 on November 28, 2008, the best record in the NFL. Burress had just played what would be his final game 3 days before against Arizona, leaving after one series with a hamstring injury. That night, he went to the Latin Quarter nightclub on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan. And here's where things get interesting. The club's security knew he had the gun. They patted him down, and they let him in anyway. Burress was walking up the stairs to the VIP section when the gun slipped down his leg, and he reached to grab it. And in that split second, it fired. The bullet went into his own right thigh.
Go up some stairs, it starts to slide down my pants, and I go to catch it. Gun go off. Boom.
And he didn't even realize he was shot until he saw blood spreading across his white Chuck Taylor sneakers. The bullet narrowly missed a security guard standing inches away and lodged in the floor. Teammate Antonio Pierce helped him to a vehicle and drove him to New York Presbyterian Hospital. And here's what nobody expected. The hospital treated Burress under an assumed name, and they failed to report the gunshot wound to the police, which is required by law. The police didn't learn about the incident from the hospital. They learned about it from the TV news reports.
The hospital didn't do what they are legally required to do. It's a misdemeanor, it's a chargeable offense.
By morning, it was national news, and that's when the machinery started moving. New York's Sullivan Law doesn't leave room for interpretation. Carrying an unlicensed handgun in the city means you go to prison for a minimum of 3.5 years. There were no exceptions and no judicial discretion, and no plea to a lesser charge that avoids prison. Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau took the case, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg went public before the investigation was even complete. On December 1st, 2008, Bloomberg held a press conference. "It would be an outrage if we don't prosecute to the fullest extent of the law," he said. "If you are convicted, you will serve a minimum of 3.5 years behind bars, no exceptions." He called it a mockery of the law if they didn't prosecute. And he said people in the public domain are role models for kids. Bloomberg finished that press conference at noon, and then something happened in that courtroom that nobody saw coming. The initial bail agreement was $10,000. 20 minutes after Bloomberg demanded the maximum sentence, the prosecutor stood up, and the number changed, $250,000. Burress posted $100,000 bail, and the Giants suspended him for 4 games without pay. By August, Burress pleaded guilty to attempted criminal possession of a weapon, a lesser charge that avoided trial and the mandatory minimum. Then, in September, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The gun going off was an accident, but the prison sentence was not. So the question isn't why the gun fired, it's why the law gave no one in that courtroom any choice about what happened next. Here's what most people don't understand about the Sullivan Law, and why it mattered so much in this case. It was enacted in 1911, designed to disarm street gangs in New York City, and over a century later, it remained unchanged in its core mandates. Carry an unlicensed handgun in the 5 boroughs, you go to prison, minimum 3.5 years. But here's what this law is about. No first offense exception, and no he shot himself exemption. A judge could not have spared him even if they wanted to. Now, the law was sponsored by Timothy Sullivan, a Tammany Hall politician. Sullivan himself died 2 years later, but the law he left behind became one of the strictest gun control statutes in the country, and it hasn't changed since. Every plea offer included prison time, and the district attorney's office rejected anything softer. Meanwhile, Bloomberg called publicly for the maximum. Burress had no prior criminal record, but it didn't matter. The law was the law. Robert Morgenthau, the Manhattan DA who prosecuted the case, insisted on a minimum 2-year prison sentence in plea negotiations. He said the case was being treated like any other similar case against any other defendant. Benjamin Braffman, Burress's attorney, later said that when you have the mayor and the district attorney both publicly demanding a maximum prison sentence, it was perhaps too much to hope for a fair review of the case. But here's where this gets even more interesting, and where the system showed exactly how it works. Antonio Pierce, Burress's teammate, drove him to the hospital that night. He took the gun from the scene, and Pierce allegedly brought the weapon to his own home in New Jersey first, then later arranged for it to be delivered to Burress's house. In August 2009, a grand jury heard testimony for nearly 3 hours from Pierce. 2 people in that car, and 2 people handled the weapon. And when the grand jury came back, here's what happened. They did not indict Pierce. Morgenthau said that Pierce showed bad judgment in the first degree, but didn't commit a crime. And the NFL did not suspend Pierce. Meanwhile, Burress pleaded guilty. He served 20 months at Rikers Island and 2 upstate correctional facilities. 2 people were in the same car that night, but only one would find out what the law really costs when it can't tell the difference. The 5-year, $35 million contract Burress signed hours before the 2008 season opener was voided when the Giants released him. The team suspended him for 4 games without pay. Then he was fined $205,882. Now, the Giants initially withheld a $1 million signing bonus installment due in December, but an arbitrator ruled they had to pay it anyway. Burress lost $823,529 in total wages. The NFL didn't suspend him because he was already in prison, and he missed the 2009 and 2010 seasons entirely. Those were ages 31 and 32, the final productive window for a receiver at his size. Those years don't come back. Inside prison, he was confined to his cell 16 to 17 hours a day, and he talked to his son Elijah for 30 minutes every night. And his wife Tiffany was pregnant when he was sentenced. And their daughter Giovanna was born in November 2009 while Burress was locked up. He missed it. And Tiffany held the family together publicly and without complaint. Burress has said prison stripped everything away and rebuilt him into something quieter and more deliberate. But he did return. When he walked out of prison in June 2011, the New York signed him in 2011 for $3.017 million guaranteed. He played all 16 games, caught 45 passes for 612 yards and 8 touchdowns, and he won NFL Comeback Player of the Year. Then, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the team that drafted him, brought him back in 2012, and he caught 3 passes for 42 yards and 1 touchdown that season. And on December 30th, 2012, he caught a 12-yard touchdown pass from Ben Roethlisberger. It was his first touchdown from Roethlisberger since 2004, an 8-year gap that brought him full circle. The Steelers re-signed him for 2013, but on August 8th, 2013, during practice, Burress tore his rotator cuff. And 5 days later, he was placed on injured reserve, and he never played another NFL game. He was never again the player who beat the undefeated Patriots with his hands. The window he fell through in 2008 never reopened. Just one night. A clean record, no victim but himself, 20 months in prison. Prime season's gone. A career window closed permanently. So the question isn't whether he made a bad decision. He did. The question is what mandatory minimum laws are actually designed to accomplish, and who absorbs the cost when they can't distinguish a mistake from a pattern. So where does that leave him? We started with a champion who caught the most important pass of his generation. We end with the same man, 2 years older, trying to rebuild something that never fully came back. The moment that cost him his freedom took less than a second. The law made sure the consequences took years.
I don't want anybody to go through what I went through, because it took, 2 good valuable football years away from me.
So if this story made you think differently, hit that like button, comment on what you want us to cover next, and subscribe for more stories like this. You won't want to miss them.